Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hi there.
Hi there.
How are you?
I am drinking this drink you made, and it's perfect on a hot day in our new recording studio.
It's pretty yummy, right?
Yeah.
So, hear that, listeners?
Clink, clink.
It has ice. Some of our drinks have ice. Most of them don't.
Most of them don't.
But this one does.
Right.
So this is a black currant spritz. This is super easy to make. I'm going to tell you the parts. So it's 3 parts dry vermouth. Now, it's important that you do the dry part, I think, because otherwise this drink could get really, really sweet really fast.
And dry vermouth almost always has a green accented label. It's in a green bottle. It has a green accented label
Yes.
as opposed to a red one or a blue one.
Yes, and this is Dolan dry. Mm-hmm. Dolan tends to be our vermouth of choice, although there are some very fine vermouths out there.
Yes.
In the recipe, it called for 1 full part of either a blackberry liqueur or a creme de cassis.
That would be a lot.
So I cut it by half. Mm-hmm. So 3 parts dry vermouth, half part creme de cassis, which is black currant.
Yep.
It's very tasty. It's super sweet, though. It's almost like just putting a black currant syrup in your drink. So it's really good in like a mimosa or a Bellini. It's really great with sparkling wine. We use it in a gimlet, too. Our
Lots of
C2
things.
gimlet has the creme de cassis in it. It's really good, but just use it sparingly. You can always add more, but you can't take it away.
That's the truth.
And then I used a blood orange soda that I got at World Market. Now, World Market has a few different brands
Right.
that you could choose from.
Right.
I just grabbed one. It said it was French. I don't know if it is, but whatever. It was in one of those fancy bottles that has the little thing you do, and it sort of compressed and it popped a little bit. Like I was like, ooh,
Like an old-timey
you think
plug.
you're champagne, don't you? That's cute.
Oh, how cute are you?
Yeah. So we have ice in there, and then I topped it with a little bit of soda. So it's 3 parts dry vermouth, half part blackberry, black currant liqueur, creme de cassis, and then top it with a blood orange soda. And it's super refreshing.
Be really
Be
good.
great for like a dinner party or a lawn party if you have friends over, or cookout or whatever. It'd be great to just pour it up and have a bunch of it, and then you
Definitely.
can it's like making sangria ahead of time, but simpler.
Yes. I would like to try doing this with the vermouth and the creme de cassis at the same levels, but then use just like a lemon seltzer.
You could totally change out the soda.
Yeah.
And it would be a different drink.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
The
should try
recommendation that I read was for blood orange, and I love blood orange,
Yeah.
so I was like,
No,
ooh,
blood orange is great. No
but
complaints.
you could totally do it with straight up club soda. You could, if you wanted something, drier and less sweet, or you could go to lemon lime, or you could go to, there's lots of places you could go.
But I really like the idea of using the dry vermouth this way because I don't normally think of it that way. So I love that you came up with a recipe that uses dry vermouth.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Very excited about this drink.
Thank you.
Excited about our conversation.
Yeah.
So tonight we're talking about vices. Now, when I say vices, what I mean is habits that some, maybe most people, I don't know, would say are not particularly healthy for us. So that could be drinking. That could be smoking. It could be using marijuana or using even harder drugs. It could be gambling. From my tradition, it could be playing cards at all. Whatever you think of as a vice, that's what we're talking about. Now, the question that I'm posing is, are vices also sins? As we know, sin, there's a very specific definition that we use for sin.
Yep.
Sin is that activity that distances us from God. It's that activity that is life-destroying, either ours or someone else's, rather than life-giving.
Now, life-destroying in this context doesn't mean that you're going to get, crushed by God.
Right.
It means it doesn't bring you into liveliness, into relationship, into...
Yes, it robs you of life.
Right.
So that was the question that I wanted to
Okay,
pose.
all right.
Now, I'm coming at this from, my background is fundamentalist, as everybody knows. And so I grew up in a tradition where pretty much everything was bad. You weren't allowed to smoke, even though most of the deacons and board members did. You definitely weren't allowed to drink. They didn't want you to play cards, not even Rook or Uno, none of that.
Right.
They didn't want you going to dances. They didn't want you bathing with the opposite sex. So when I went to summer camp, boys swam with boys, girls swam with girls. There was no mixed bathing involved.
And bathing here, you mean getting into water. You don't mean like
getting
having
into
a
the
bath.
creek.
Right.
I just mean getting in the creek.
Yeah, okay.
No soap involved. Just swimming. They called it mixed bathing, but it was mixed swimming.
Right.
We weren't allowed to go to movies because movie theaters were viewed as places where the devil could enter you.
Ugh.
And it didn't matter if you were going to see the Aristocats. if Hellblazer 2 was playing in the theater next door and somebody saw you go in, they would assume you were going to Hellblazer 2 and then going to hell too. So,
well, it used to be a speedy trip. You could just go into one movie and be done.
It was like a trap door, really. You just
Seats come
you'd
out.
sit down with your popcorn and then like the floor would drop out and you would just descend to Sheol right then.
I love that.
Like, do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Okay.
So
All right.
I grew up in a church where basically everything was viewed as potentially dangerous. And when I say everything, what I mean is cultural influences. So movies, music, entertainment of all kinds. Also anything that could become a bad habit, which would include things that maybe your body adapts to or becomes addicted to.
Okay.
Like nicotine or like alcohol or things like that. So all of that was considered like you should keep your distance from all of those things.
What about coffee?
Nobody ever said anything about coffee.
Okay.
And nobody ever really criticized food.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's where I come from. And so those things were not only viewed as vices, they were also viewed as sins. Because they were viewed as things that we should not do. Mm-hmm. They distance us or potentially distance us from God. So it's almost like you're creating this buffer between you and the world and you and the devil by not participating in these things.
Oh, by not participating in
Right. By not participating in these things.
Okay. Wow. All the questions I have, all the questions. So let me start with this one. If you were to draw a Venn diagram of your question. No, because I want to make sure I understand. Are you asking the question of all of us, listeners and me and everybody, are you asking the question, are vices a subset of sins? Or are vices identical to sins? Or like give me the Venn diagram, because I'm trying to understand what you're asking.
What I'm saying is, if you are sinning, you are not necessarily smoking. But if you are smoking, are you necessarily sinning?
Got it.
I think that's what I mean.
Okay. Wow. All the things. Okay. So I admit that when you ask this question, I don't go to Bible or church at all. Mm-hmm. I go straight to Dante and to Aristotle.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So let me talk about Aristotle for just a second. I'll try to make it short. So Aristotle conceived of what we would now call ethics as being about a balance in your, a good way to put it might be something like impulses, a balance of impulses.
Okay.
And the idea was that virtue was the balance, vice was the imbalance.
Okay.
Okay. So if you're talking about the virtue of courage, the vice would be cowardice.
Oh, okay. So each vice has a flip side?
No, but if you think about a one of those number lines that goes both ways.
Okay.
Okay. One end would be cowardice.
Okay.
The other end would be foolhardiness.
Okay.
Courage is somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Make sense?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Aristotle conceived of it that way. So vices are the things that are not the virtues, right? So they're the extremes. Now, I'm butchering Aristotle here, people, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But that's the idea. So when you talk about vices, I'm always thinking, well, what's the opposite virtue? Or what's the opposing virtue? Or what would the other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you say, for example, that smoking is a vice, I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't actually compute, right? The other way of thinking about vices that I always come up with is there are 7 virtues, 7 vices. And those are in constant opposition to one another, which is kind of like that battle thing, the devil versus, So it has that Dante kind of feel to it, right?
Okay, sure.
So, but again, when you say something like smoking is a vice, I'm like, okay, so what's the opposite of that? Not smoking?
Yeah, that's not a continuum. That's just a binary.
Exactly. In that way of thinking, you can think about it as a binary, but you still need something more than just not that.
Right. Yeah. And I understand that the way that I'm using the word vice, I'm really talking more about like bad habits, unhealthy lifestyle choices, I don't know. But yes, I'm
Okay.
not talking about vices in the classical sense.
That's right. And my bet is we get that from the Puritans.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we do.
My bet is we get it from that sense that you are to be fully in control of your person at all times. Anything that is not in full control of your person is a vice.
So these habits mean that I am ceding my control
Over your person.
over my person to
Something else.
whatever the activity
Your
is,
animal
or whatever the person
instincts.
is. Right. Okay.
I don't know, witches, whatever you attribute these things to.
Okay.
So my guess is it has something to do with that. And then it kind of got transmogrified, perfect word for
Yes.
this, into the way you were brought up thinking about it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. But it does make me think about like dieters who have a cheat day. Cheat day in this should be a vice.
Okay.
Okay? Because if what you're supposed to be doing is virtuous and you break from it, it's a vice. So do we think cheat days are sins? A little tougher.
Yeah.
I think about, these people who are really, really, really obsessed with not aging and who put themselves in freezers for time every day and eat, take umpteen, whatever, they do that kind of stuff. If they have a piece of chocolate and they call it a vice, do we consider that a sin?
Well, some would consider the being in a freezer for hours a day a sin.
Yeah. So you see the problem with using vice in that way?
So first of all, I guess what we can say is these things aren't actually vices.
Okay.
I mean, probably a different conversation for a different day is gluttony a sin, for instance? If gluttony is a vice...
Much better.
If gluttony is a vice, then
Right.
is gluttony also a sin? But I think what I want to talk about has more to do with these things that I was told that we should not do.
Right.
And not just in my little church, but many Christians
Oh,
will
absolutely.
say,
Yeah.
you don't do these things.
For sure.
And then there's also, science that says you shouldn't smoke, for instance.
Right.
I'm picking on smoking. But if I choose to smoke, I don't smoke, but if I choose to smoke, and
Sorry,
it becomes,
I just had the image.
and I'm holding as I'm talking about it, I'm holding my hand as if I'm holding a cigarette. So,
Oh, y'all, if you don't know Benton, this is like a hysterical image.
just noticed that I was gesturing this way. So if I smoke,
And I immediately went to cigar.
I don't know how to hold a cigar.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
But if I choose to smoke because smoking brings me pleasure, or I enjoy smoking with my friends because they smoke, or whatever the reason,
You're
I
like
don't care
Rachel on Friends, and you need to be with your boss, and your boss takes breaks where she
Right.
goes out and smokes, and you can't get the promotion if you're not hanging out with your boss when she makes these decisions,
Right.
which is when she's on her smoke break.
Right.
So that.
all
of those
all
things.
of those things.
Okay, got it.
All of those things.
Got it.
Am I also sinning when I choose to do these things? Well, I think for myself, if I were doing that kind of self-examination, I would think, well, why am I smoking? What is that feeding in me, or what am I attempting to satisfy with smoking? Is it something that I could be satisfying with? I'll be ridiculous, but could I satisfy that with prayer? Could I satisfy that with meditation? Is there something that I'm using smoking to do or satisfy or appease in me?
Right.
And if so, is that thing,
Right.
is that drawing me away from God?
Right.
And if so, then I think I could make an argument to say that probably is sin, because what it's doing is it's actually pulling me away from my relationship with God. It's taking my attention from God. Sort of like fasting. You know how we talk about fasting is fasting is really about understanding your need for God. And so instead of eating, I mean, you can fast, you don't have to fast from everything, but you could decide you're going to fast from Reese's Cups, for instance. And instead of, every time you want a Reese's Cup, instead of having a Reese's Cup, you pray. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have Reese's Cups and you should pray all the time. There's nothing wrong
Right.
with Reese's Cups.
Right.
But if Reese's Cups are filling a role in your life,
Yeah.
and you recognize that, and you continue to eat Reese's Cups anyway,
Right.
then at that point, I think there's probably an argument to be made that what you are actually choosing is to not rely on God, but to rely on Reese's Cups or cigarettes or whatever the thing is.
Okay, so many things in that. So let's start with that filling the space, that the longing you have for God with something else, or the need you have for God with something else, which is, straight out of our various parts of a miraculous you, right? There's our soul that is always longing for connection with God or the greater life, or however you want to phrase that, but easily is distracted and satisfied for a moment by other things.
Yes.
And so that might be Reese's Cups, to use your example.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that as you were talking about it, the word vice is an ethical description. The word sin, in the way you're using it, is a practical word. Okay? And I don't mean like useful. So if I say, staying with Reese's Cups is good. Although, they need to give us money because we are advertising the heck out of them right now.
I love Reese's Cups.
Yeah, I know you do. All right. If Reese's Cups are satisfying briefly, right? It's junk food. And I mean junk food both spiritually and physically in this case. Right. So if I'm taking in some kind of, spiritual junk food, rather than reaching out to God, I would say that there are lots of things going on there. Could be sin, okay? Could be bad habit. Could be self-destructive, like unintentionally, intentionally self-destructive. But there's no vice. Because there's no I shoulds that you are departing from by eating the Reese's. Okay?
Right. Okay.
So if your I should is broccoli, miso soup, rice, and that's your should, and then you have a Reese's Cup, okay, I'm going to go with vice potentially because it's counter to your should.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So that's the way I'm kind of framing this right now.
Okay.
So there are two different kinds of questions. And the problem with the question is, are vices sins, is you're talking about two different qualities of thing.
Okay.
So it's a bit like saying, is rice bread? Well, it could be if you dry it out, turn it into flour, and then make it. But, it's two different kinds of questions, right?
Yeah.
So going back to the one that you were talking about before, the smoking one, notice the way that we talk about it. If you're talking about somebody smoking, and at this point in history, what we tend to do is to say, okay, what are the reasons? What's the physical addiction? Can you change your habits so you're not putting yourself in the position of wanting to smoke? Do you put on a patch? Do you like all of these things? Behavior modification, all of these things. Each of those has its own quality to it. So even if you think smoking is the deepest sin one could commit, then it isn't even a vice. Right? Because it becomes all these other things. Okay. I think part of the problem with the language of vice is we have very little ethical foundation at this point.
Yeah, we should.
We could do a series of episodes on this one. But as a result, using the word vice, it just doesn't work. It's like kerosene, right? It's meaningful. It refers to something, but very few people actually use kerosene in their daily lives at this point.
Right.
Right? So I think that's the problem with that language. And so when somebody says, now, you shouldn't dance, dancing is a vice, we just kind of go, okay, I understand what you're saying, but it actually makes no sense.
Yeah, so how should we talk about these things then?
Well, I think that the language of psychology and medical has actually been pretty helpful on a lot of them. I think that sin, I want to be really careful before I say this. Sin is not an activity, it's a quality of an activity. Sinful is a much better way of talking about it.
Right.
So a sin is an activity that is sinful, full of sin. Okay? If we are in a terrible argument, okay, and we've taken a break from the argument, and I walk past you in a huff, and I don't speak with you, my walking past you is not a sin. My attitude toward you might be.
Yeah.
Right? That's the key. So when you say something like walking past someone in an argument is a sin, you're missing the whole point. It's that whole thing, like the stuff that goes into you is not sinful. The stuff that comes out of you is sinful, right? So it goes to that whole thing. The problem with when we talk about sin, particularly sins, is we want to count activities. How many times did you smoke today? Okay. Well, that means you sinned X number of times. As opposed to us always, because of who we are in this material world, inclined to get more involved with the material things than with the spiritual. Meaning we live in a state of sinfulness or sin possibility. There's no condemnation of this. It's a statement of where we are.
Yes.
And so this kind of goes back to Aristotle. So turning toward God would be the virtue. Turning away from God would be the vice. But it's because of what it gains us, what works, right? So if you're dancing and you're having a good time and you're burning off energy and you're not going to be in a position, square dancing is like the obvious, right? If you're square dancing, you're not sinning.
No.
Unless you are lusting after the person you're square dancing with in a way that makes them an object. Then you're sinning. Because you've turned that person into an object.
So it really comes down to what are we really doing when we're doing X, Y, Z?
That's right. And what are the outcomes of it?
And what are the outcomes of it?
If it involves other people.
Right.
So I would say, because I'm very condemning about this, having grown up in this household, that if you are a smoker and you smoke all the time in the house and your child is breathing in secondhand smoke all the time, I would call that close to a sin.
Yes, because you're harming someone else.
Because you're harming somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's in a self-centered way.
Listeners, what do you think? Do you think smoking's a sin? I'm not asking because I want to try it out and see how I feel about
Again,
it. Because smoking grosses me
just...
out. I grew up around smoking and I don't care for it. But would love to hear from you guys. You can always find us at cocktailtheology.com. We would also love to hear questions like this that you have, but also terms that you have heard, even like preferably recently.
Yeah.
It could be in the news, it could be at church, it could be, with your friends or whatever. Terms your kids are bringing home from school. Yeah. I don't know what that means, or why does that make me feel gross, or what does that make me feel less than somehow?
Oh, I like that.
What's going on with that term, and
right.
or a sentence or a phrase or whatever? We would love to hear that because we did a series of episodes last season on sort of debunking language or trying to demystify, words that have been used to sort of bludgeon people, honestly.
Right. Reclaiming words.
Reclaiming that language, right? So we would love to hear those words and phrases. Please do share those with us, cocktailtheology.com. And wherever you're listening right now, if you would do us a favor and simply follow or subscribe, we would love that because that improves our analytics. It helps other people find us. And the other thing that helps other people find us is you. So when you tell people, I've been listening to this really crazy podcast where they talk about smoking while they're drinking, you should listen. Then I think you should share us on your socials too while you're at it. That'd be great.
Well, and since it's summer and you may be going on a road trip, I think you need to download all of our episodes from all the seasons and on the road trip with the person next to you who can't get out of the car because you're going 65 miles an hour on Highway 40. You just play every single one of our episodes.
I like it. I love it a lot.
I like it. I love it. Okay.
All right. Till next time, friends. Bye-bye.
Bye.